Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is The Art of Building and I'm Swa. We are in the middle of a project that is a hydraulic lift table. It's a foot operated hydraulic jack powered metal cart that is going to be able to lift things from about a foot off the ground to about 3 feet off the ground, and it'll sit on a dolly that has wheels on it so I can move things around in my shop. And what I've done so far is work on the legs, which are comprised of there's a scissor on each side. The leg is one square tube with 2 1/4 inch by 2 inch flats on either side. So this video is going to cover the making of the square tube, the notches for the ends, rounding over the one end so that it's more of a finished product, and I added some washers to it. The footage that I thought I recorded did not get saved because I ran out of storage space. So I don't have video footage of the washers being added, but they are added each face to reinforce the metal because the tubing that I used has sort of a thin wall to it. So by adding the washer, it adds some surface area for the bearing on all the pivot points. So this is what the tube looks like. These are the washers that I added to it. So let's get into the video. So this is the square tubing part of the leg. It's pretty thin wall. I think it's 11 gauge. And I've already cut this shape out. We did that in the last video. And now what I've done is I'm clamping it in the vise. And now I'm going to be able to tack it where I want the bend to start. And then I can slowly start working the hammer to bend that flat around the curve that I've already cut. And the idea is if I can make these two flats come together and bend in a fair curve around the ends of the sides that I've cut into a half circle, it makes the end of the tube appear rounded. It's smoother. The corners won't stick out and catch on anything as it's pivoting, because this end of the tube is going to have a pivot point. It'll have a bolt running through this tube that's going to go through the frame, and that'll be a fixed point that will pivot, and the other end of this tube will have a notch where a wheel will be fit into the notch, and there'll be an axle that runs through the wheel and through the leg. That will make up 1/2 of the scissor. The two flat pieces of steel will go on either side of this tube, and they'll get supports welded between them to make them act as one member. And then they'll get a pivot point with a wheel at the other end. And that's how our scissor's going to operate. So I keep bending this flat around. This side is a little bit easier to bend because it's a little bit longer. And now I'm going to mark on this edge where this piece overlaps the other. That way when I roll it up and I go to cut it, I can see where the bottom needs to line up, because I'm going to cut this with my bandsaw. You could cut this with a hacksaw, you could cut this with a cutoff wheel. The bandsaw works really good for this. And the idea is I'm trying to leave just enough room between the two pieces so that I can bend the two flush with each other and make a fair curve, and then weld across that seam. And once I'm all done with that, I'll grind everything back as smoothly as I can and make that end look pretty smooth and round. Now I'm going to add some weld to the end and try to fill in all of these corners. And as I do, I can tap on this, bend it back. I didn't love how this one came out. I liked the other leg a little bit better, but on this one, unfortunately, I think I was focusing a lot on the video portion of it, and I was sort of rushing the bending Normally I would take a little bit more time and try to make this neater. But overall, I think it'll come out okay. I needed a little bit more room here, so I'm going to nip this back a little more. Because the more flush that I can get this steel now, the smoother the finished product's going to come out. Because eventually I'll sand this down and paint it. And we want it to look nice when it's all said and done. And this is the part that takes a little bit of patience. I try to take my time with this thin wall tubing and MIG welding. It's very easy to overdo it, overheat it, and burn a hole in it. And I am not a fantastic welder, so I have to be careful that I keep things kind of under control. So I've got that weld across that joint right there. Now I can finish up the curves. And it's okay if I have a little bit of extra weld because I'm going to grind it back off. I just don't want to leave a low spot. Now, I've got this all welded up and snap. With a little grinding, look how clean that end came out. So you can see the washer there on the end. That's helping to make the whole tubing essentially thicker. And so I have a 3/8 hole at this pivot point and a 5/16 at the other end where the caster is going through, because that 5/16 bolt has to fit through the caster. Now this is the other end of the tube. And what I'm trying to do is create a notch in the end of the tube that's going to go, it's a U shape that goes up between the washers. The tricky part of this cut is cutting across the tube at the end of the notch. So my plan is to drill 2 holes at either corner of the notch, and then I can connect those 2 holes and I can cut in from the end to those holes, and that'll help me cut my piece out. In order to make this hole, initially I start with a 3/16 bit, and I have a fence set up that holds the square stock in position. And the position I want is so that the outside of this drill bit is just brushing the inside wall of the tube. So I drill my pilot hole to get everything started, and then I'm using this 5/16 bit. That size is not vital. It's just important to have it flush to the inside of the tube. Here you can see it better since I don't have the clamps on there. The camera's focused a little bit better. But now I can, once I clean this out, you can see the spacers I have in there. Those spacers allow the tube to sit against the fence and not be skewed because of the washer, because the washer sticks out. So if I didn't have a spacer in there, the piece would be crooked. So that spacer holds it nice and parallel to the fence. The end stop helps locate that tube so that I know that my hole's in the right position end to end. And I go back to my 3/16 bit. I get it set in there and I make sure that's tight. Then I can clamp it back down and drill another hole. I know the holes are located in the same distance back from the end of the tube. And I go ahead with my 3/16 pilot, which it's easier to do a smaller hole first. And sometimes you can use a unibit or a step bit. But in this case, I need the same diameter hole top and bottom in the tube. And a step bit won't allow you to do that because it changes thickness every 1/8 of an inch or so. So that's why I'm doing this in 2 passes. And because I have this setup, I can also take my next leg that I have, the next piece of square tube, I can put in the same jig. It'll drill the holes in the same location. And they don't have to be super precise because this is just allowing clearance for that wheel. So I'm just trying to remove the material from the end of this so there's space for that caster to go in between. And it sort of makes a saddle with a hole on each side. And that, again, that washer reinforces that tube steel
and essentially makes the bearing point that's resting on that axle that's going to hold the caster, it makes the metal a little thicker there, so that there's all this weight isn't going to be bearing on a real thin piece of metal on a 5/16 bolt. So we've got the tube with our holes in it. And in order to make this crosscut, this is a Dremel type tool that it's a Milwaukee brand. And it's not a real powerful tool, but it is handy for little small stuff like this. You could try to do this with a jigsaw, but it's tricky because sometimes the jigsaw blade will bottom out on the lower part of the tube and it'll jump around on you. And I can't get my bandsaw in there. So by making that cut first, I can make that cut on both sides. And then I'm taking the bandsaw here, and this is simply cutting off the waste material. None of this material means anything, and this cut doesn't really have to be very perfect. I just want it to be close to those washers, because eventually I'm going to trim everything back to the edge of the washer. So that gets that out of the way. Now my goal is to cut just inside the wall of the tube, because I need all of that width for the caster to fit in there. And because I can see in the end of the tube, you can't see it on camera, but I can watch where that blade is, and I can tell that it's up against the edge, or at least really close. And I'm going to stop when I get to the center of that hole. I don't want to go past that, because by leaving the corner round, that helps make that notch just a little bit stronger. The square corner is a little bit weaker, and it allows things to bend a little bit more easily. So I'm hoping that will help keep it a little bit stiffer. I probably could have gone a little bit shallower on this notch too, but the clearance is okay. Now I can take my bandsaw, and we're just nipping off these corners here. I'm trying to cut it pretty close to flush with the outside of the washer. I don't have to be too concerned with being too neat. We'll flip this over so I can see what I'm doing here. But I'm going to get these corners cut back. And then I can get the grinder. Like I said before, I don't like to do tons of grinding on camera. It's not great for the camera, but I want to show you a little bit of the shaping, because I want these to be a pretty fair curve. I want it to be pretty round and even when it's all said and done. So I can take these high points off. I can shape these rounds, and I'll do both top and bottom. And then the other thing I need to do is clean up the notch where I cut with the bandsaw, because those cuts you can see in the video right there, they're pretty jagged cuts. And I want that to be as smooth as possible, so nothing's binding when that wheel is rolling in there. So a little touch up there. Then we'll get in there, clean that notch up just a little bit. This is just to rough out the material. I'll probably use a flap wheel to really get it smooth later on. But that gets our shape put together. And we're almost ready for some assembly.
Okay, so that covered making the square tube part of the legs. The next video, I'm going to show you the frame that I've already put together, the base, and we're going to be putting the legs to the base and locating the pivot points, finding our spread between the legs and our support for that, and starting to work on the position of the jack and where it's going to be pushing on that scissor mechanism to make it rise. So hope you can stay tuned and check that next video out. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Appreciate you watching. Take care.